Winters in New York can be cold and rather quite harsh. The icy roads and cold winds are enough to put even the most hardened New Yorker off from venturing out into the night. The ever-rising levels of violent crime would have been at the top of the list for demotivators only a couple of years back. But the world is not what it used to be anymore. It was only 3 years ago when the first super being, as the media would have you call them, sprung into action on the daily news channels and saved the world from a terrorist attack. The masked men armed with knives and a homemade bomb planned to cause a little commotion in downtown London by turning a few of the Queen's finest public transports into a political statement of fire and shrapnel. What they did not plan to be was the first criminals to suffer a beating at the hands of the United Kingdom's first full-fledged superhero. Union Fist was the name they went with, a slight nod to the country's flag, and a blatant reference to the fact that his fist literally reduced a terrorist's head to roadkill, pasted up the walls of the London Underground. From then on, appearances seemed almost weekly. Heroes debuted into the world, and crime fell like a swarm of dying locusts. Internationally feared crime lords fell under the boot of men and women alike, some quite literally under boot. Japan erected a statue at the boot of Miss Kaiju, who giantized herself and stomped a building, which at the time was holding a rather large number of Yakuza family heads. Men skilled in the art of sword did not see it coming, nor did they stand a chance. The world came to love their superhero protectors, or so the media and world leaders would like to have you think. And for a time, there was peace of mind and prosperity amongst the people of the world. So why open a story with the good guys won and the bad guys lost? An empire for good, vanquishing the forces of evil? Well, as a wise person once said, all empires fall. And as another wise person once said, not everything is as it seems. The freezing winds and the icy roads did not stop the convoy of 4x4s from reaching their destination, pouring into a rather large abandoned-looking hangar on the city docks. At least 20 of the tinted window vehicles, crammed into a large dark building near the entrance, kept company by a group of rather large men in black bomber jackets and beanie hats with cold, bitten red cheeks, no doubt positioned there to assure the meeting at the back of the hangar remains as exclusive as possible. At the back of the hangar, groups of men stood, anxiously sizing each other up. Each man looked like poster boys for America's most wanted criminal. Despite the standard rugged and dangerous look that haunted this group, there was an aura of restlessness, and perhaps a little fear. Quiet mumbling and nervous whispers were all that kept the tension in the air from becoming a nerve-snapping silence. The silence was eventually broken by a low, rumbling voice attached to a very well-dressed Chinese man stepping out of the darkness. He calmly walked into the middle of the circle and addressed the herd. "Thank you for your patience," he says, calmly, while turning his head, slowly eyeing up the audience. "Allow me to introduce you to the man that you have all come to see today. Gentlemen, I give you Mr. Hui." A barrage of intrigued whispers flooded into the air as a small elderly man, dressed even better than his announcer, walked slowly into the middle of the room. Although elderly and frail-looking, this man had a serrated and dangerous aura to him. While his announcer seemed to take the time to lock eyes with everyone in attendance, this man did not seem to pay the slightest mind to who was watching him, almost like he was looking right through them. When he spoke, his voice echoed a tone that naturally oozed the demand for authority. You all know who I am and why I am here. I also know why you are here. You wish to live in a world where you can profit from what you do best. I wish to create a world where you may achieve this. But in order to achieve this, there are sacrifices that must be made. His strong accent was cut off by a loud scoffing sound that echoed from the front of the crowd. One of the larger of the monstrous men from the audience stood forward and looked the two Chinese men up and down before spitting on the ground. The two men stared on completely emotionless, waiting for the man to make his point. So let me get this straight. You've called every gangster and criminal in this city to this meeting, and you expect us to waste our time on your bullshit. We've all come here to listen to two little motherfuckers preaching some new world order bullshit, and you expect us to eat it up. Tell me, old man, who do you actually think you are? Mr. Hui and his associate simply stared through the hulking man as he snarled back at them. The hangar was as silent as a graveyard, as over 100 men looked on with eyes wide and mouths open in disbelief. The tension was suddenly broken, not by the voices of the Chinese men or the harsh, low voice of the city native, but a soft-spoken British accent that slithered into the room with no trace of origin. That, my good fellow, is Mr. Xin Hui, head of the Dragonblade organization, lord of the sovereignty over superpowers movement in the whole of Asia, and to us Western world dwellers, the most wanted criminal on the planet. I trust your reading skills extend to the ability to handle a local newspaper. The voice triggered a wave of confusion amongst the audience as the large American screamed threats and demands for the voice to step forward. An uncharacteristic smile formed slightly on the face of Mr. Hui. You may show yourself. You are an integral piece of this plan after all. With that command, the owner of the voice appeared from the darkness behind them. It could be a man, no taller than 5'11", dressed in a simple black suit, with his hair shaved short at the sides, with the rest tied back into a ponytail. Half of his face was covered up with a long white scarf, and only his eyes pierced through the cover. His eyes, dark and almost soulless. The rest of the onlookers seemed to think the same, as a thick blanket of nervousness coated the room. This man, unimpressive in stature, stood with his hands in his pockets, staring a cold gaze almost into nothing, but possessed a silent confidence that would make even the most ferocious predator second-guess itself. The large man, however, did not seem to feel the same vibe as everyone else. Why, you lying motherfucker! You got some balls to step up and talk to me like that. Wanna tell me your name before I blow your head off, so I can put it on your tombstone? He reached the inside of his jacket to potentially pull out a weapon. The audience looked on in anticipation. Mr. Hui looked on, still holding that smirk. The smaller man calmly sighs and pulls his hand right out of his pocket, brandishing a shiny pocket watch. He stares at it as it ticks. Well, this isn't exactly the manners I was hoping for when coming to this country. Still not entirely surprising. I don't think my name is at all important, especially not to you. Before anyone could react, The potential gunman let out a shriek of shock. His entire body spasmed and jerked back. Sounds of disbelief and panic began to spit out from the audience as a large man seemed to hover unintentionally towards the well-dressed Brit, who looked up from his watch slightly, but his eyes had changed. From the soulless dark circles to a hellish blazing red of pure fury and malice. The floating man tried to scream and fight, but was utterly helpless. He began to cough and contort as his skin rapidly dried and aged. His eyes, once wide with life and horror, began to cloud over. The gums in his wide open mouth began to recede, and his hair withered to grey and fell out. The man had withered and aged to a corpse-like state before everyone's eyes. "I believe your point has been made," Mr. Hui's voice calmly cut through the wall of horror. The Brit let out a gentle sigh, and with a slight nod of his head, sent the corpse crashing to the ground. The corpse returned to its original form of a hulking man, but the man looked more like a rabbit facing down a wolf, utterly petrified. The Brit put away his pocket watch and reached into his inside jacket pocket, pulled out a small tin, flicked it open, and proceeded to take out a cigarette. He flicks down his scarf to expose his face was covered by a sheet of what looked like shadow, like a face mask made of dark energy. He takes a drag of the cigarette. The end lights instantly, without need of a flame, and he blows out the smoke softly. His demon-like eyes once again return to the dark pupils that look over the head of the horrified hulk on the ground. "To yourself and all the other fine chaps here, I am simply an advocate." The room stood utterly silent for a moment, until one onlooker muttered something about the use of magic. What was that? Magic? Oh God, no, my boy. I would not use something so primitive and childish. The Brit growled through his scarf. What I am is something much more primal. Mr. Hui nodded his head towards the advocate with a satisfied grin. "As you are all aware, I will be meeting with some very important associates of mine in Chinatown this evening. This meeting will involve men and women of the highest positions of influence throughout Asia and the criminal underworld. There will also be an item of irreplaceable importance being delivered through Chinatown en route to myself. I must have this item in order to further our objective." Mr. Hui's associate continues on from his boss. "This is where you all come in. We have under reliable sources that the Wraiths have reached a consensus to mobilize against us. They are aware of a delivery and of Mr. Hui's arrival within the United States. They will attempt to steal the item and take Mr. Hui's life in the process. It goes without saying that you must protect this cargo and Mr. Hui with your lives." Excessive murmurs rumbled through the audience as Mr. Hui raised an eyebrow. "Do you have a question?" One of the men nervously steps forward with a shaky voice.
"Yeah, sorry sir, but did you just say Wraiths?"
"Yes, the World Recon and Intelligence Terrorism Hindrance Society." This confirmation only stirred up the murmurs even more.
No disrespect, sirs, but if they're involved, the morale is as good as dead."
A chorus of hums in agreement echoed through the room by the masses, but is soon cut off sharply by the advocate. Well, that's when I come in. He steps closer towards the audience, brings his cigarette to his mouth, blows the smoke out into the air as it circles around in a constant loop and takes the form of the letters Wraiths. Before he blows it away, apart from having a stupidly cheesy and unproductively long name, I'm surprised Disney hasn't had it trademarked. The Wraiths are, yes, as you already know, a society of elite assassins. In order to even be eligible for selection, you need to have 100 confirmed kills. But let's be fair, there were plenty of hits out there for wannabe contract killers to chase before the supers came along. I will get to those in a moment. The advocate looks over his shoulder, staring blankly into space, as if he is deep in contemplation. He nods to himself and then continues. The Wraiths operate in teams of 10. For missions of this importance, 10 of the most elite warriors to save time. And as a showing of their arrogance, they will split into teams of 5. That is 5 for the item, and 5 for your head, Mr. Hui. Now I will take care of a team of 5 with little difficulty. But unfortunately, my abilities do not gift oneself with the ability to split into 2 beings, so I can only take on 1 team at a time. Simple math, yes? He proceeds to take a closer step towards the group, making the large men in the first lines lean back nervously. May I hazard a guess? Whichever task I do, you will throw this wall of testosterone-induced heap of man-steak at the other. He turns his head slowly towards Mr. Hui, who simply smiles. For $50,000 each, I expect nothing less. Mr. Hui's assistant responds, in a tone somehow even colder than before.
This is suicide!
One of the onlookers shouts out, with a sense of desperation.
1 brave assassin will be enough to cut for at least 50 of us. You expect us to take on 5? These monsters kill armies. And to top it off, I know you guys are not from around here, but this is New York, the city of superheroes. They'll be on to us within minutes, and we're all done for.
A diamond question from the ogre in the back, with the timid voice of a 5-year-old girl. Advocate cuts the man off. Tell me, how many supers operate in this city? Will you tell me, please? A brief conversation ensues, with some of the men finding their nerve and sharing the information about the city's heroic population. The advocate listens, with chivalry, nodding slightly at times, taking in every detail. 10 minutes later, after a good few men have spoken, he nods, turns around, takes a few steps away, whilst looking at the ground. He once again takes out his pocket watch and simply gazes at it, watching it tick away in silence. The man looked on, anxiously waiting. No one dared to interrupt the man. Okay then. So by the information that you have all given me, there are 15 supers in this city at this present time. Typical behavior of the super suggests at least half of them will consist of a fully fledged and a sidekick. There will be at least 2 supers in this city who believe themselves to have omnipotent power, and a few who are dying to prove themselves. The omnipotent egos won't trouble themselves just yet. So that leaves the overly eagers and the extreme do-gooders. From the possible abilities that they possess, I believe at least 2 psychics from 2 pairs will possess extrasensory capabilities. Has anyone here been tracked, or know of anyone who has been tracked by a super, despite being absolutely certain that you covered your tracks? One of the men shouted out from the room.
Yeah, I ransacked the supermarket last year and...
Yes, good lad. Advocate cuts him off. The super who tracked you.
Yeah, it was Madam Wanda and her little bitch scout.
Madam Wanda? What the actual... Advocate sighed and shook his head gently. If they haven't started suing each other over these names, they really should start. Okay, so it can be safely assumed that her scout has sensory abilities. This means once fighting starts, it won't be long before they arrive on the scene. This Madam Wanda is highly skilled in combat, with super strength and speed from what I've heard. Also, her scout will be able to alert her of any sneak attacks. The Brit nodded to himself again and turned to Mr. Hui. Mr. Hui, I would like to propose a new plan. Let the wraiths take the item. Confused murmurs once again grace the atmosphere as Mr. Hui looks calmly at his advocate. I trust you are about to tell me a reason why I would do such a thing. Of course, the Brit replies, while taking another drag of his cigarette. 5 wraiths versus 100 of your men will resort in a bloodbath that'll no doubt waste the lives of these fine young shirted torsos, and will alert the supers. I will not immediately be there. The item can be recovered at a more convenient time. Your head cannot, once it is detached from your body. Also, if one of the heroes arrive and start hammering away at your men, more supers will join, thus amassing a rather large group, which would really be an inconvenience. The room lay silent as he takes a step forward towards Mr. Hui. Watch still in hand, he looks back down at it and sighs gently. Position your men in places of strategic interest to alert me of the wraith's whereabouts. I will deal with the 5 that come after you first. My power, even if used in a small amount, will attract the attention of the more talented sensory supers. They will arrive, and they will die equally as fast. Afterwards, I will hunt down the remaining 5 wraiths, who no doubt will have captured the item by then. But with your safety assured, I will retrieve the item with little trouble and return it to you with little casualties on your side. Of course, guards will be needed around the vehicle transporting the item in order to avoid suspicion, but the assassins may not immediately go for the kill move. if they look like regular guards as opposed to armed mobsters. Just let them take it. He turns and starts to walk away, while flicking the butt of his cigarette away on the floor, waving goodbye to the sea of amazed onlookers. Mr. Hui frowns and lets out a low, humming sound in contemplation. What makes you think that you will be able to retrieve the item once it has been taken? And what makes you think that you will be able to deal with the supers that arrive, Mr. Advocate? He continues to gracefully walk away, but slightly turns his head, so Mr. Hui sees the glaring red glow of his eyes pierce from over his shoulder. The voice that came from his mouth made the hairs on every man's neck stand up. A voice that sounded like many and one at the same time, like 1,000 horrified screams and the calmness of a summer breeze. Because they are supers facing me, they may as well already be dead. Good evening, gentlemen. He fades away into the shadows in the corner of the room, leaving his audience to contemplate the night that is yet to come.